Hi friends! I'm so glad to see you today. I know my hair looks funny. I'm all dressed up for celebrating the week of the young child. It's crazy hair day today and I've got my crazy hair on today. So I brought you a book. It's called The Wump World, and since we're learning about Earth Day this week, this is a fiction story by an author named Bill Peet about some animals and how their world got ruined. And we don't want to do that to our world, our Earth. That's our home. So this is a story about that. And I'm going to start reading it. Let's start with the title page. And here it says, The Wump World by Bill Peet. The Wump World was a small world, very much smaller than our own world. There were no great oceans, lofty mountains, giant forests, or broad sandy deserts. The Wump World was mostly grassy meadows and clumps of leafy green trees, with a few winding rivers and lakes. But it was perfect for the Wumps, who were the only creatures who lived there. What do you think? Does that look a little bit like our Earth? Here's our Earth right over here with the globe. It does kind of look like our Earth, all green and blue. The Wumps were simple grass eaters and spent most of their time grazing on tall, tender grass that grew in the meadows. In warm weather, they cooled themselves in the crystal clear rivers and lakes, and at night they slept in the shelter of the bumbershoot trees to keep the dew off their backs. Since the Wumps had no enemies, they wandered about just as they pleased, with nothing whatever to worry about. However, the Wumps would have worried if they had known that someone a million miles away was watching their little world. There they are, very peaceful with their bumbershoot trees, living a happy life. One morning, the Wumps were awakened by the sound of humming. Do you see something coming up here? It seemed to be coming from somewhere above, and as the humming grew into a heavy roar, the sleepy-eyed Wumps crept through the trees for a peek at the sky. Zooming straight for the earth came a great flock of pot-bellied monsters with tails and fins, spitting fire and shooting out streaks of black smoke. Now, I don't think those are really monsters. They look like some kind of spaceship. But to the Wumps, those are kind of scary looking. They look like monsters. They've never seen those before. As the monsters swooped down to land, huge legs sprang from their bulging sides, and like gaping mouths, the doors flew open, and then ramps shot out to the ground, and down the ramps came a horde of tiny creatures swarming out onto the meadow. These were the pollutions from the planet Plutus. They had left their worn-out planet to start a new life in a new world. And after such a long journey, the pollutions were overjoyed to find themselves on solid ground once more. They were all prattling with excitement as they followed their leader, the topmost pollution and world chief, across the meadow. At the top of a hill, the chief stopped for a long look at the surrounding countryside. And finally he said, "Looks good. We'll take it. Plant the flag, Sergeant, and let's get things going." So they came from far away, and when they got there, they decided to just take the land. And we talked about this morning on our Zoom meeting, the land belongs to everyone. God made it for all of us. So to just take it, that does not seem like a healthy-hearted thing to do. One shrill trumpet blast brought giant machines thundering out of yawning spaceships, rolling down runways and out into the meadow. The timid Wumps had been watching wearily from the shelter of the trees, and at the sight of the giant machines, they were horrified. look at all these machines, do you notice that wherever the pollutions are, there is a lot of smoke and dirt going into the air? And that is not a healthy way to live when there is too much smoke and dirt in the air. That's called pollution. "Wump! Wump!" cried the Wumps in a wild-eyed panic. They went humpity-clumping all through the trees and went diving headlong into the nearest cave. They were really scared by what they were seeing, and so they went down into a cave to be safe. Then down they tumbled head over heels through a twisting tunnel to end up huddled together in dark caverns, while the earth-shaking machines rumbled and roared high overhead. Once they got started, the monstrous machines moved at a furious pace, gobbling up trees and grinding them into bits. More giant machines flattened the ground, followed by great scoopers and scrapers and diggers and gigantic cranes. Soon the entire Wump world was overrun. See how they're tearing down all their trees? And look at all this dirty pollution going into the air. The busy little pollutions kept their mighty machines going full blast day and night without let up in a frenzy to improve their wonderful new world. Suddenly great cities sprung up, huge factory buildings with towering smokestacks, high-rise apartment buildings, and tall, tall office buildings. And above them all loomed 100-story skyscrapers, really, really tall buildings. Look at all these things they're building. Along with the buildings came a tangle of streets and freeways with on-ramps and off-ramps, overpasses and underpasses, jammed with trucks and buses and cars of all sizes, rushing pell-mell in every direction. It was one great turmoil of noise and confusion, and there was still more to come. Meanwhile, the poor Wumps remained underground, wandering aimlessly through the caverns, feeding on fuzzy green moss growing on the ledges, and mushrooms that were clustered in the crannies, and sipping sweet water from the pools that were fed by underground springs. But they were very unhappy. For all they knew, they might have to spend the rest of their days down there in the cave. The Wumps didn't dare venture up to the surface, not even for a peek. And they were much too frightened by the endless rumblings and roarings and loud screechings that were coming from above, and it was growing noisier by the day. So they have some food and some water to drink, but they really want to be in their home. It's dark down there and not what they're used to. There was more and more noise and more of everything. More buildings with more smokestacks puffing more and more smoke. And more freeways with more traffic shooting out more and more clouds of exhaust. More trash and more trash piles with more and more waste gushing into the rivers and the lakes. Look at what the pollutions have done to the Wump world. It does not look beautiful and green and peaceful like it did before. There is so much smoke and dirt and trash and dirty water, dirty air. Pretty soon the cities were clouded by the factory smoke, and the fumes from the freeways, the pollutions, could hardly breathe anymore. They went sneezing and wheezing about the streets, grouching and grumbling, and blaming one another for the awful mess they were in. So even the pollutions aren't liking the world that they have made. It is making them sneeze and wheeze and not feel very good. One day, an angry crowd gathered outside the World Tower, demanding to see the world chief. And when the chief appeared on his balcony, all the pollutions began shouting at once, "We can't breathe the air, we can't drink the water, and we can't stand the noise. We've had enough." Kerchoo, sneezed the chief. "I know just how you feel, and something will be done at once." With no time to lose, the chief called for a meeting with his 3 top outer spacemen. "Gentlemen," he said, "this world has gone sour. We've got to get out of here quick. But first we must find a new world, a better one. That's your job, men, so get going." "Righty-o, Chief," barked the men, and within 15 minutes they were at the spaceport aboard their spaceships, and then zoosh! 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 The men took off in 3 directions, and in seconds they were zooming about in outer space at 7,000 miles an hour. So where are they going? They're going to look for a new world to live in. Days passed with no word from the outer spacemen, and after waiting a week, the world chief flew into a rage. "Blast it all!" he bellowed. "What's keeping those blithering bubble heads?" Then one Monday morning, out of the dark, smudgy sky, swooshed one of the spaceships. And as the ship touched down, the men hopped out shouting, "I've done it! I've done it! I've found a new world! A bigger and better world." "Nice going, lad!" cried the world chief, and the crowd gathered at the spaceport and gave their hero one great rousing cheer, which ended in a fit of sneezing. In no time, the great news was sent flashing around the world over radio and TV, warning all the pollutions to be packed and ready to go within 24 hours. At dawn the next day, the entire population swarmed into the Space Center and crowded aboard the giant spaceships. So they're all getting on those same spaceships that they came on, and they're going to go to this new world. Does that seem like a healthy-hearted choice to make the Wump world so dirty and polluted and then just leave for another land? Another world? Wow, that doesn't seem kind. That seems very selfish. After double checking to make sure all the pollutions were accounted for, the world chief gave the signal for blastoff, and with a thunderous roar, the giant ship shot out of the ground. Kazoom! Up and through the smoke-blackened sky, they were gone. And at long last, there was peace and quiet, and it all settled over the Wump world. The sudden silence came as a shock to the Wumps. They could hardly believe their ears. Still, they wanted to take no chance, and so they remained in their caverns with their ears cocked for the slightest sound. So the pollutions are gone. Is it safe for the Wumps to come out? They're trying to figure it out. They're listening to see if it is. After a long, long silence, they decided it was time to go, and led by the biggest Wump, they crept out of the tunnel of the cave entrance to find that it was covered by a crust of cement. And with one powerful push of his snout, the biggest Wump bumped his way through. And then one by one, the Wumps waddled out onto the freeway, and they gasped in wild-eyed amazement. They had feared that something awful was happening to their world, but this was much, much more than they ever could have imagined. They were staggered by the size of the huge buildings with the walls and walls of windows looming up on every side, and the broad layers of hard, flat crust that were covering the earth and felt strangely cold on their feet. There was no sign of any tree or tuft of grass. Even the sky was gone. It couldn't be seen. And the Wumps wondered if there was anything left for them. At least they must find out. They wandered the freeways for miles and miles, only to find more and more buildings with endless heaps of wreckage and rubble. For all they could see, their world was completely ruined. Footsore and weary, the Wumps were about to give up and head back to their cave when the biggest Wump let out a joyful Wump! Something's happening. He found something. What do you think he found? Just ahead of them was a grassy meadow with a clump of bumbershoot trees, all that was left of their lovely world. Wumping for joy, the Wumps went bounding off of the freeway and out into the meadow. And pretty soon, the hungry Wumps were munching away on the tall, tender grass. And now there was new hope for the Wumps. Some of their world was left. And in time, the murky skies would clear, and the rains would wash away the scum from the rivers and the lakes, and the tall buildings would come tumbling down, and the freeways would crumble away, and in time the green growth would wind its way through the rubble, but the Wump world would never be quite the same again. All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed that story. I know it's a long one, but it's such a good story. It helps us really think about how we want to treat our world, and if we want to be like the pollutions who don't think about what their effect is on the world, what they're doing to the Wump world, or if we want to be different and take care of our earth and take care of the plants and the animals that God created and keep them safe. All right, my friends, I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you very soon. Bye.